Greetings once again. Today has been a very full day, a very interesting day, and we are so grateful for all of our listeners that have tuned in once again with our Talk Back Town Hall meeting of the Mississippi Western Tennessee District Council. This session we'll be talking about voter suppression. We know that the election is coming up, and we want to be ready, and we want to understand every tactic that's out there. So we have some very informed panelists, and I thank you once again for choosing and agreeing to come on and talk with us. Representative, how you doing?
Hi, all is well, and thank you so much for having us.
All right, from District 11, Representative Latasia Jackson, and our new elected prosecutor. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Attorney Rod Hickman. Dr. Beverly Frazier is coming on. She, some kind of way I gave her the wrong link, but she's coming on and she'll be joining us. So let's get this conversation started. We see a lot of tactics that's going on with this voter suppression. We see what's going on in the media. And I want you all to talk to our audience about the things that we can be aware of and how we can make sure that we're not in the way of that our vote will count during this election, because we know that this is a very, very, very crucial election that is before us. Representative Latasia, I want to start with you. Come on, talk to us about this.
Well, again, I want to say thank you for extending the platform to us to have this much needed conversation. For this is a very important election, as all elections are, but there are so many things and so many things within the media that so many people are paying attention to in this particular election. And I would just like to start out by encouraging voters to be mindful of the narratives and the narrators of the various individuals that are promoting the vote for various candidates. So many issues that are important to us as a people are different for a certain sector of people. And sometimes the commentators and the narrators of the narratives that are formed behind particular candidates are shaped in particular for the views of those individuals. And I'll just give you an example. I am very thankful to the ministers and the ministerial alliances that have formed and extended their platforms for conversation and dialogue. So I thank the Tennessee District and Mississippi District for allowing this opportunity within your conference and your platforms, because we're seeing a lot of evangelical priests and preachers come on and use their platforms to do the very exact thing. And when it comes to issues of abortion rights and issues of homosexuality, we're seeing some ministers take a platform for those particular issues, but are disregarding issues of criminal justice reform, police brutality, unarmed Black men being killed. And we are seeing where the issues that are near and dear to them are being catapulted on a stage as why a particular candidate is the best candidate. I've seen ministers use the policy that was signed into policy from the Trump administration regarding tax exemption for church-based areas as a reason to promote the vote within religious leaders. And where those are some issues that individuals will very much so benefit from, I want individuals to understand that we can't overlook systematically the issues that impact us all. And it's not that we are to neglect one issue for another. All things are important, but we can't have a bias where we only focus on particular issues that only affect us as an individual or as a sector of people, and use those things to say, this is the adamant reason why we all should be inclusive of this individual and support a particular candidate. I'm asking voters to look at that as voter suppression and look at that as a way and a mechanism to encourage or steer your vote for your godly principles. We can't neglect certain godly principles for others. I mean, sin is sin.
Right.
I mean, sin is sin, and we can't be in a position where we allow the narrative of hate to be neglected. I heard a particular minister use kneeling as an offense for protesters, and basically saying that, we shouldn't kneel for nobody but God. And so these particular antics and narratives are basically confusing, in my opinion, a lot of Christian believers that are voters into thinking that this is in support of the country and their heritage or their rights to citizenship within the nation. And so as a believer, they're thinking, because of the narrative again, that a particular candidate may be the best candidate because they are embodying godly principles. But again, God is an amazing God and an awesome God. And he says to us directly, sin is sin. You can't hate one and love the other. You can't say that one thing is wrong and one thing is right when it is sin regardless. So I'm asking voters not to use that as suppression to say, hey, I'm not going to vote at all, or I am going to vote a particular candidate because of these godly issues. Let's be cognizant of what is actually happening in this nation holistically, and let's look at what's the best form or best leadership for our nation.
Thank you, because you brought up a very important point, because you're saying that they can be using that as a means to suppress our votes, that they are just focused on one issue, and they've always used the church as when we start talking about godly principles, and we thoroughly embrace that, but they use that to say, this is why you need to vote for this candidate, without looking at the whole holistic portion of what's going on. Yeah. Now I want you to talk to me, either one of, and thank you, Dr. Beverly, for joining us. Thank you. We see that in Texas, they're having problems that I saw in California with the drop-in boxes with our ballots. And so talk to me about how we can ensure that our vote will be counted when the election is all over.
So, and that's a great point. I just had a conversation this morning with a cousin of mine regarding how important it is that the vote is counted. As an elected official, we receive an analysis, a data report of individuals that have participated in particular elections. So when you vote in this presidential election, that data and that information is collected, where you could check your own voter record to make sure that your ballot was actually counted. In the state of Mississippi, we do not have early voting. We have in-person absentee voting that started earlier than normal because of COVID. So individuals are able to go to their circuit clerk's office and basically vote in person at that circuit clerk office, or they can request a mail-in ballot. And if you call and request a mail-in ballot, you have to mail that ballot back. It does have to be notarized. In some instances, if the individual is disabled, then they only have to have a witness. But if you're just going to merely be out of town, then the ballot has to be notarized. And so there are certain things that have to be in play in order to do that. So I'm suggesting that voters, whether you're going to be out of town or you need to vote early in the absentee in-person process, if you can, go to the circuit clerk's office to assure that you get the ballot in time. So making an actual plan for voting is really, really vital, so that you can know exactly what the process will look like for you. If you're planning to wait until November 3rd and vote at your particular precinct, that's your plan, that's your prerogative, but absolutely have a plan so that you can assure that your vote is counted. After the election, you could assure that the ballot has been cast by assuming your voting record. And another thing, just quickly, with the voting record, a lot of times we look for where are the resources from the national level for DNC, for the Democratic Party or Republican Party, whatever party of choice. What actually happens for resources to come to the state of Mississippi and Tennessee, they really look at how many people are actually voting. in the presidential elections. So when you're looking as a particular party to receive funds from the national parties, it's based on the voter participation. So in the state of Mississippi, they compare the results of the presidential election. As state representative, I wish they paid as much attention nationally as to the constituents that voted for me. However, that's not how it's done. They assess how many people actually vote in the presidential election to determine the number of active voters and inactive voters within our areas. So please, individuals, your vote is counted on so many merits. Yes, for the particular candidate that you want to see in those various positions, but also for resources for voter initiatives and resources for those precincts.
Thank you. Dr. Beverly, you all have early voting, right?
Yes, yes.
And so talk to me, have you cast your ballots yet?
I did. I cast my ballot probably a couple of weeks ago. This was the first time I actually posted it on Facebook because I thought it was funny that after I voted, I actually prayed that my vote would actually be counted. And the reason for that is that there's so many levels of determination that can actually disqualify a vote. It is a small percentage, at least that's what we're hearing nationwide, that is a small percentage. But everything from the exact signature to putting it on the inside of the envelope properly and so forth and so on. The thing that's really so disheartening about that is that African Americans, which may or may not be a surprise to most of us who are hearing this, we're at a higher rate, of course, disproportionately, of having our vote not to count or having our mail-in vote actually discarded. And so it is important to have panels like this to remind us that whatever the guidelines are, that we have to be, even more diligent than we always have been. I think that there's always been a level of voter suppression. I think that's without debate. But there's no question that the amount of lawsuits, the amount of tactics and antics that have been put in place this year really, really is in comparison to years in past, that this is striking. And so what we have to be very diligent, very aware of what's happening, and make sure that our votes are counting, that we do know the process, that if we have to have the same signature on our driver's license, use the same signature on your driver's license. This is the year, if it never mattered before, that it would matter. And it's very, very sad that we're having this conversation, but it is what it is. And the one thing that I am still excited about, is still very motivated about, is that we do live in a land of a democratic republic. And there is something very awesome about that. And in order for us to kind of take that power that it gives us back in our hands, we have to do a little bit more work this year. And so that means having a plan, as Representative Jackson said, that is key. I've been hearing it all over the place, and that's true, and doing our homework. So we have to put a little bit more effort, maybe even a lot more effort, and making sure our vote counts than we ever had before.
So, Attorney Rod, so what do we need? Because I have a lot of listeners that's here in the state of Mississippi. What should we do as Mississippians to ensure that our vote is counted, and on this day, that when it's the election time, or if we need to get out to vote? Can you speak to us on that issue?
Absolutely. I think we just want to start out with what both Dr. Frazier and Representative Jackson, who is also my law school classmate, has said. You got to have a plan. There has to be a plan in place. One of the things that's very interesting that I think is worth mentioning is that there was a lawsuit in Hinds County where the Civil Liberties Union sued the state of Mississippi regarding who could actually vote absentee, because we're one of the very few states, we may be the only states that don't have early voting. As it was mentioned, we have absentee, but there are certain conditions. You need to be either over 65, out of the county that you're voting in on the day of elections, permanently disabled, or going to or going to be working the full time, the whole time that the polls are open. But even if you fall into one of those categories, of course, we can't talk about voter suppression this year without talking about COVID. A lot of people are scared to go to the polls. You have a lot more early voting. Well, Mississippi made a law. They passed a law that basically says if you have a condition that's directly related to COVID, then you could also vote absentee. But that does not include pre-existing conditions. So just because you're at higher risk doesn't mean that you're able to vote. They're specifically saying in that law that you have to either be quarantined or caring for someone who's quarantined. And so the court came down with a ruling to say, a Hinds County, Judge Owens, who I know, a Hinds County judge basically said that if anybody had a pre-existing condition that made them of higher risk, then they could take advantage of this law. And the Supreme Court actually overturned that, saying that she interpreted that too broadly and that not every pre-existing condition allowed you that opportunity. And so I made that point to show you how openly voter suppression is going on right now, among other things, but especially with COVID. In Mississippi, what you need to do if you are voting absentee, you either need to contact somebody who's very aware of the process to make sure your ballot is correct, everything's signed correctly, everything goes correctly, or you need to take the time. It's not just a marking your ballot. You need to make sure you read every single word on your ballot, because absentee voting is very complicated. If you're doing the mail-in version, you have to sign all the way across the envelope. Here in Mississippi, your signature has to match the signature that's on file in the courthouse with your request or whatever. And so there are a lot of things you need to just make sure you're prepared to read every line. I tell people, if you can get out, if that is an actual option, then what I would suggest is that you go out and vote absentee in person. That's a little easier process. The circuit clerk takes care of that. If you can't get out on the day of, get out the day of. And if you are going to get out the day of, know where you're voting at, because we know that since the Voters' Right Act, parts of the Voters' Right Act has either expired or been overturned by the Supreme Court, people are moving precincts. And the one thing I think about, voter suppression is sometimes intentional, but it's not always intentional. And it's not always black or white. You have some places that are closing precincts because, well, they said we don't have enough votes there. Well, then they cause someone to have to drive 10 miles to the closest precinct when you're in a rural area like where I live. And so you may be doing it with good intention, but you don't realize that not everybody has a vehicle. Not everybody has someone who's going to come pick them up on election day. And so you have all kinds of issues going on during that time. And so I would just suggest that you have a plan, know where you vote, and make sure that you get everything taken care of prior to election day.
Talk to me about absentee ballots versus affidavit ballots, because we find ourselves, if we go to the wrong precinct, and they cannot find our name, many times we want to vote, and that vote is not counted because we are not in that precinct. So talk to us so our constituents would know the difference in affidavit ballots versus absentee ballots. So either one of you all.
So you have your absentee ballot is going to be the ballot that you send in the day before. Now, affidavit ballot is if you actually get to the polling place, they can't find you. Like, I've known people who go to one polling place, they say, oh, well, you're probably registered here. They go there, they can't find it. Or if they can't find your registration, if you know you're a registered voter, then you shouldn't leave the poll. Ask them to vote by affidavit. And that means that's where you'll get your affidavit ballot and you vote provisionally. And once they get after election days, because you have some close races. In my county, we had a race last term that was decided, I think, by like 20 something votes. And so they do have a point where they have to open and count all of the affidavits. And so never leave the polls. If they say you're not registered, you know that you're registered, you can't find the right precinct, you can vote by affidavit. And then that's all sorted out in the absentee process. And so that's the difference. And I always tell people, if you go to vote, don't leave the polls, no matter what they say. And sometimes, I was talking to somebody about this. Sometimes our polling places are a bit hostile. Like, they're intimidating in a sense. Like, you're walking into this room with people that you don't know and they become intimidating. But if you went to vote, if you stood in line, if you've done whatever you've done to get there, your mission needs to be to vote and don't leave without voting. And that could include getting an absentee ballot or a provisional ballot.
All right. You brought up a point about sometime, and I've heard this on the news, that the environment in the polling place can be very hostile. So how do I handle this? when I walk in as an African-American woman and I'm in a precinct that is predominantly not of my race, how do I handle when the person at the books, they just talking all over me or they disregard me? How do I need to handle this? Because that is a mean of voter suppression or something could be going on. Dr. Beverly, you are the one that teaches social justice.
Well, as I mentioned before, I do consider voting in America both a right and a privilege. And of course, for some of us, because of our descent, voting has been a struggle and still is. So it is really important that we understand it's about who we have in the White House and all of that, but it's also about the autonomy we have as citizens and as voters to actually exercise our right to vote, so that when we do show up and it's hostile, that we are very adamant about why we're there. So do we want to add to that hostility? Absolutely not. Are we firm that we're going to do whatever it takes so that we are able to vote? Absolutely. And again, having the information ahead of time helps tremendously, because some poll workers are probably more better trained than others. And so the more information you have and the more homework you've done, the better off you are. But I do think that just understanding how important it is and not kind of acquiescing from that, and having the information, I think those things will be extremely helpful when we actually show up. But one of the things I just wanted to mention also about the signatures is that if the signatures are based on older signatures, I think as Attorney Hickman mentioned, I mean, there's a lot of reasons our signature changes, sometimes age, sometimes illness, just a lot of different things. So they really pose a challenge. So if there's ways for us to find that out too ahead of time, then I think we should do that as well. So if there's ways for us to, contact our local, voting offices, registration offices, so that there is not an issue with that, we should do that, because those are other ways in which our votes will not be counted.
I saw I think it was in California, that they put outside of the church false boxes, and they were having people to drop their ballots in. And then I saw in Texas that there was a lawsuit on that. They are removing the number of boxes, and they're just trying to do everything, throw the kitchen sink, so we will not go to vote. I know here in Mississippi, we were asking for a change in the polling place for a larger place because of COVID-19. And somewhere down the line, they refused to change that. So Representative Jackson, talk to me how I need to handle that when the line is long and they can't find my name, and what I need to do on election day.
Well, I would just like to say that our election commissioners are really, really vital in whatever state we're in, be it Tennessee, Mississippi. And because of COVID, our election commissioners and circuit clerk officers were able to actually apply for grant money to assist them with some voter education and resources to primarily be able to adjust some of the precincts to include additional machines as needed. Hinds County, in particular, one of our largest precincts in the state of Mississippi, received, I think, $1.5 million to provide additional resources on election day. And that may sound like a lot of money, and it is. It's a substantial amount of money to add additional resources. But I want voters to understand that there are some things in place to aid during COVID. But as we've said earlier, having the plan and not feeling no waste tie in this process is what we need all voters to hear. But the by any means necessary approach is necessary for this particular election. And having that plan matters. I talked to my grandfather who lives in Memphis, and my grandfather stood in line for an hour to assure that his vote was cast. And he did what was necessary. And as an older gentleman, making sure that he was able to be counted in this election was vital to him. And so I don't want us to use the strategies or the things that are done, as Attorney Hickman mentioned, that may be strategic or may not. That could be because of budget restraints in that particular area that cause suppression. Don't allow those things to deter you, because you're needed, and not only this election, but in all elections, so that we can have individuals that are assuring that the individuals that are actually taking part of our voting process, the election commissioners get to hire and assure poll workers to count those ballots and to be there election night, that go through the absentee ballot, that open the envelopes and make the discretionary decisions as if we should count the ballots or not.
Right.
So not just our presidential candidates are important in election time, but who's the election commissioner for your particular offer, for your particular area? Are you able to call on them and ask for clarity regarding your ballot? By any means necessary, we have to make sure that we utilize all resources that are available to us to make sure that our votes are counted, that the ballots are counted in the box, and making sure that we are not falling to any type of tricks or any type of schemes that are done as they've been done in other states and other areas. So on election night, when the ballots in Mississippi are counted, I want individuals to know that the election commissioners decide who's in the room. Candidates also have a right to have individuals in the precinct to actually collect, see the box transferred, and at the particular courthouses where those boxes are counted. So there will be some things that are in place for voter protection to make sure that the ballots that are actually cast on election day are counted, and also to get an accurate count of the number of absentee ballots that have been cast as well.
I want to know, what can we do as the church to get involved with this election? What do you suggest that we, the church, what can we do to ensure that our constituents are out to vote and our voice is being heard?
Well, again, I want to thank pastors and leaders like yourself for using your platforms to have the necessary conversation. Faith comes by hearing. The word says that in all that we get, we are to get understanding. And you've been able to use your platform to provide understanding for individuals like this would give us a better opportunity to get voter information out and voter education out to so many voters. In addition to that, I would ask pastors and leaders to also encourage members to actively work election day in those polling precincts, so that some of those individuals that may come to the polling precinct and may need some help, just seeing a friendly face in a precinct, you have a right, if you need help when you go to vote, to ask for help. And so being a friendly face, a greeter of a church would be an amazing person to be in a polling precinct to help someone navigate through the process, because sometimes the machines are intimidating to individuals that have trouble reading or understanding, and they don't really know, and sometimes they need individuals to aid them. So being a part of elections are really important, and it's not just saying, hey, vote for this person, but it's assuring the democracy and making sure that everyone has an opportunity to be heard by casting their vote. In addition to that, I'm making a plea to our pastors and leaders, as I started out earlier, talking about how certain ministers are using their platform to focus on certain issues that are within the Bible to support and uplift and elevate a particular candidate. We need you to say publicly and out loud that we cannot focus on a few things that are religious principles and beliefs, and allow those things to be the determining factor for this one candidate. There are so many things that are important to the body of Christ that we have to not negate those issues for 3 or 4 issues where we may benefit as well.
Great. Attorney Rod, can you speak to us? What can we, the church, do?
I think, like Representative Jackson said, the main thing is education. Educating our individuals. I was very proud. Our assistant pastor, who is also one of like the pillars and mothers of our church, she was very, very, very concerned this election about the members of our church understanding what's on the ballot. I think one of the other things we're thinking about voter suppression and ways that our vote can be suppressed. We can't just stop at the top of the ballot. In Mississippi, there are some important initiatives on the ballot. Our flag is on the ballot. There is in the Central District, I think one of the most crucial races that is on the ballot, not only in Mississippi, but anywhere. We have a race for the Supreme Court Justice that's on the ballot. And I think we just need to make sure that everybody understands exactly what all is on this ballot and don't just stop. I mean, I think, not taking any sides or anything, but I'm of the opinion we badly need a president in this country. But not only that, we need, the individuals. We need to make sure that we're shaping our Supreme Court, that we're shaping our local, like Representative Jackson said, our election commissioners, because that's on the ballot for Mississippi this time. And, things like that. So we need to make sure, one, that we're educating at what's on the ballot, but we're also encouraging the people that we have some influence with to go to the bottom of the ballot, but, understanding what's at the bottom of the ballot. And these are some important things. So I think the biggest piece is education. I started a nonprofit last year called Empowering the Pews. And the idea is to, make the church relevant in society. And I think the idea that we need to understand is that at one point, our churches were the pillar of our community. That is where we received this information. That is where we got this information. Somewhere along the lines, I think we were tricked into this whole idea of separation of church and state, to where churches started shunning away from being somewhat involved in the political process of what's going on in our communities. But we can't really serve our people unless we serve them holistically. And the political process is definitely a part of that. And so I think we have to just start educating people on what's on the ballot, who's there, and, being active about this thing. I was very proud. A couple of Sundays ago, we had like a civil engagement Sunday at our church, and we had Judge Latrice Westbrook, who I'm hoping become Justice Latrice Westbrook in November, who is going to become Justice Latrice Westbrook in November. She was there, and she was our speaker for the day. And so things like that really make a difference. And but the flip side is, not only does it empower your ministry, but it also gives your ministry an ear to people who are in these positions and places. And so it provides not only the avenue for your individuals or parishioners to be involved in the process, but it puts you as a church in general, it puts the church into this process. So while, I think Representative Jackson was talking early on about, we have some issues that have been pushed to the forefront and some who have been pushed to a side. Right. Well, we then have the opportunity to shape platforms when we become a part of the process. And I think that's very important.
Thank you. Dr. Frazier, how can we, the church, be involved?
Well, one of the things that I've been thinking about as I heard the other panelists kind of talk about the role of the church is, I remember before I became a pastor, I worked for the mayor of Jersey City. And one of my projects during that time was to actually be his campaign manager in one of the wards of the city. Probably one of the most thrilling things I've ever done in my entire life. But a huge part of my strategy was actually getting out the vote. So I do understand from a kind of practical hands-on experience how important it is to actually get people to the poll, wanting to vote, having a desire to vote, wanting to make change. All that stuff is wonderful. But until you actually get to the poll or get there in early voting or get your ballots in. It does, all your intentions really don't matter. And so I think in this world of disinformation, misinformation, all of these strategies to thwart, to stop, to discourage people to vote, that the role of the church in getting out the vote is even more important than it's ever been. So one of the things our church is doing is we have an election panel, a voting panel next week on the 20th and also on the 27th. And we have people coming in talking about, from a faith perspective, why voting is so important. And I think it was Representative Jackson who mentioned this, and I'm very passionate about this as well. And that is that there's so many voices in terms of evangelical Christians about specifically who you should vote for. So I'm not sure I'll go that far. I know who I'm voting for, and I'll be willing to say that. But what I am willing to say is that we must make it clear that voting is not an option. This is the one time we can't be on the sidelines. I also wrote a blog on our church website, welcome to morningstar.org. And in that blog, I wrote, vote silences consent. I talked about how abortion is such a huge issue for the evangelical, right. But yet Black Lives Matters is not. Like, you can't hear a word. I mean, you can't hear a word when it comes to those kinds of issues. So while I do believe that God does have a purpose that he's working out in time, he's in charge. He has an internal purpose, what we call in seminary the eschaton, so the eschatology, that God is working out in time, his plan from eternity. I believe that we still participate. He's given that. He's created us in his image. He's made us like him. We're like God. He's given us dominion over everything in the earth. And that includes our politics. So for us to sit on the sideline is like, oh, God's will is going to be done. That's not biblical. For us to sit on the sidelines and not be active, there's no good theology in that. And so I think it's important for leaders first to understand how important it is. The other thing that I'm so excited about is that our church is actually a polling center. And so our church is actually involved in that, participating physically as well as volunteers. But it is critical, and it could not be more important. And so in this piece I write, silence is consent, is that whatever you don't like by voting, you're saying it's okay. So, I mean, it's just that simple. Whatever you don't like about what's happening in our society, the policies that are put forth, all of that stuff, by not participating, you're saying that's okay. And the reason I think it's so important for us to make sure that we kind of push against that narrative of being okay is that there is so much misinformation. There is so much disinformation. There is so much, literal strategies and plots to keep people from participating or voting the way that you would want them to vote. And specifically, I think about in the last presidential election, when Russia was involved in our election, putting all this propaganda against Hillary Clinton, true or not, is aside, but putting it forth specifically targeting it to African Americans. And I'm like, wow. But I will say this one thing, kind of to sum up all of this. From a spiritual perspective, I do believe that there is what I call this kind of this spirit of deception that I believe that's been released, where people would rather believe a lie than believe it. You can look at what Trump did with was it QAnon last night? Exactly. And we could go on and on and on. And they were interviewing some of those people on CNN, and they actually believe that politicians and rock star, musicians or whatever are kidnapping children. They're drinking their blood. It's just unbelievable. It's unbelievable that we would rather believe something that's not true than to believe the truth. And I think that we are so full into that, regardless of wherever you get your media, because, in teaching my students, I teach them that all media are propaganda, and we just we choose the one we like best. But wherever you get it, it's just so full of illogical deception, and that we're still drinking it up, and we're still consuming it. So I do think that that now more than ever, and I'm not an alarmist, but now more than ever, that the church must have a voice in this. We can't be on the sidelines on this one.
Michelle Obama said in a speech that she gave, she said the same thing you said, Representative Jackson. She says, by any means necessary, she said, get your mask, get your lunchbox, get your sandwich, get an apple, and be ready to be in line if that's what you need to do. So you guys had talked about a plan. So how do I plan for this time in my life to make sure that my vote is going to be counted? I want each one of you all to speak to that. Tell me some tips that I can do, some tips that I can pass on to somebody else, some tips I can put on my Facebook page, because as we know, everybody's on Facebook. What can I tell my constituents, my friends? How can I ensure that our vote is going to be counted on election day? All right, either one of you guys.
Well, one thing that I will say is that we absorb our information in different ways, and people are at different places in their lives. So there's some people that, yep, they'll do all their own research, they'll go online, they'll make phone calls, and there are other people, they're just not going to do all of that. Right. And so in those cases, I think that I would say for people that you trust, your grandchildren, your children, your friends, those people that are informed, reach out for help. So if you're not going to be that person that kind of puts your hands on it and do it yourself, which I think of course is preferable, then at least reach out for help. At least don't isolate yourself and not try to not reach out for information. Even if it's just one phone call, try to find a way to get information so that if there is a 10-hour wait, like there was in some parts of Georgia, you know it. You're prepared for it, because some people were in and out in 20 minutes. Some people were out in and out in an hour. I have family there. Other people waited 10 hours to vote. So I think getting information, the best way you consume information is important, but getting it is important. So, part of your plan needs to be active in getting information. From there, I think it also has to just be based on whatever your restraints or resources are. So if you have a car, then of course, and you can drive 10 miles or 50 miles or whatever the case is, then that's great. If you can't, then you're going to have to get a ride with somebody else. So depending on, what resources you have also determine what kind of plans you have. If you don't have early voting in your state, then you're limited with that. If you do have early voting, then you have a lot more options, just in terms of, hopefully, in terms of actually not that pressure of that 8-hour, 12-hour period in that one day. So I would just say that as much as possible to reach out and get information. Don't feel like it's so much of a burden. Oh, there's so much going on. I don't know what to do first. I don't know who to call first. There's so much. Don't be overwhelmed by it, because that's not what we're trying to do. All we're trying to say is that there is an effort for your voice not to be heard, and that we want to encourage you to kind of take ownership of making sure that your voice is heard. So now that's said, take a deep breath and just reach out and try to find out as much information as you can. It is available. It is at your fingertips, whether it's your grandchild that can go on the website for you, or your niece, or somebody at your church. Just do what you need to do. And everybody else, where it is, www.something, or pick up the phone and get the information. But yes, it is important. But please don't feel overwhelmed.
Representative?
Well, Dr. Frazier was amazing. I was really in tune to everything, and I don't want to echo or say the same thing over, but I would say the planning is necessary for this election. Select your date. In the state of Mississippi, you have until October 31st to cast your in-person ballot. So plan your date. if you know November 3rd, you're going to be working and you may have some challenges on the 3rd, or you're frightened because of the possible lines at the precincts or due to COVID, whatever it is, plan the date, set aside the time and say, hey, on this particular date, I'm going to vote. And make this plan necessary so that you can be prepared to stand in line if that's necessary, and your circuit clerk's office is bombarded with a lot of people, even if it's in person, and you're trying to get that done before October 31st. Plan another extended lunch time to maybe go and do the same. But the planning is going to be necessary for the Howze County and larger counties that have the longer lines in their precinct areas. Going early is going to be important. In person, I prefer because of the issues with the mail-in ballots. So having the plan that's necessary is vital. But if you wait until November 3rd because you're adamant, like my mom, you want to be on the machine and make sure it's cast, I say have that plan necessary and stay there and stay the course so that we can assure that things are done. They'll have some resources at the various precincts. And this is another way that some of the churches have expressed being involved, being able to provide water or whatever is needed at those areas, but take your lunchbox, whatever is needed. But if your plan is November 3rd and you know or have heard of lines at your precinct being really long and you don't want to wait, you have until October 31st to go to that circuit clerk's office and do it in person. If you would like to wait on November 3rd to be cast during that time, let's say this. As long as you're in that line before 7 o'clock, they have to wait on you.
Okay.
They have to wait on you. So make sure that you're planning and not getting there at 7:01, 7:02 because of your work schedule. If work or whatever may conflict, go in-person voting, because in Mississippi, we don't have early voting, but early voting started yesterday in Tennessee. And we've seen the lines and we've seen individuals post on their social media pages pictures saying that I voted. I think that's a very good strategy that we all can use our platform. Let's not just wait on the church or wait on the elected official to use their Facebook or social media platform to encourage and promote voting. Use your resources because you are influencers. I can't reach everybody, but if each one reach one, we all do this collaboratively. And thank you so much for that question.
Attorney?
So I think the first thing is I call it have your voting tribe, and basically know the people that you're going to be checking up on. Have a list of people that you want to assure have voted, whether you guys are early voting, absentee voting, or if you're actually going to the polls. So have that group of people. Check in on your family members, especially the ones that are older, who don't know the process. Make sure that they properly requested their ballot. When they get their ballot, make sure that process can go through. I think that's the first thing is, know that you're going to vote and know that the people that you're going to check up on and make sure they're voting. If, again, I already stated it, if you're going to absentee vote by mail, read every word there or have someone who's experienced with doing absentees there to help you fill out your absentee. If you're going to the courthouse, in some places, most places in Mississippi, I don't think there's a line. In some places there are, but if there's a line, make sure that you block out a good part of your day. Don't go when you just have, 20 or 30 minutes. Block out a good part of your day to go and vote. And then most importantly, if you're going to wait until election day and vote on election day, like I myself plan to do, I think that you need to make sure that you block off some blocks of time. If you're working, don't just depend on your lunch break. Maybe you can run in on your lunch break, but I have seen, voting machine failures and things of that nature. Go ahead and block off your evening when you get off work to be, if I can't get it done during my lunch break, then I'm going back right after work to be in line before 7, and I'll stay the course to get it done. So I would say clear your day other than things that you have to do on election day to make sure that you can vote. And one of the things that we can do as a church, if you're not working and you have the capabilities, make sure everybody at your church is able to vote that day. And you can start a sign up with people who needs rides at your church. You can, I mean, I don't think any pastor will be mad at you putting a sign out saying, hey, I'm not working. If you need a ride on election day, put your name, phone number down, and I will make sure you get a ride to the poll on election day. Finally, if you are one of those people who need a ride, I'm sure, you know, most of us are from rural areas. Somebody knows somebody that has a car. Make sure you have a ride for the day of election day. And most importantly, and I think I'll begin with this and I'll end with this, just know that there is no other option other than you voting, and that you're going to get it done. And I think you'll be able to get it done if we're able, you know, to do those things.
You led me right into my final question. And my question is, what can the church do to ensure that our constituents are out there and ready and can vote? And you just brought in one point, and the other ladies, Dr. Frazier, Dr. Jackson, can you allude, what can we do to, we understand, just like you say, it's not enough to talk about it. It's not enough to say, oh, things are bad. It's not enough to say, I don't know what we're going to do as a nation. What can we do to turn this around with the help of God? And it's not enough just to pray about it and say, we're going to pray about it and just leave it to God. Faith without works is dead. We preach that all the time. So it's time now for us to get out and work. So what can we do as a body of believers to get out and work to ensure that the voters have their voices heard?
So within the prospective areas of the church, we have a list that you can be able to check to see inactive voters within your particular area. And a lot of times you'll hear individuals say, well, oh yeah, I voted. Yeah, I voted. And it's not enough to rely on them only by words of testimony to say that they voted and not have the proper dialogue sometime. So not only just asking them about voting, some individuals, it's going to take a little more than offering a ride or offering resources to them to vote. So there may be particular voters that are hard to engage. And I'm asking leaders to talk about to talk to those individuals and have the necessary conversations where we're not pushing you into selecting a particular candidate or what may be, but we're actually sharing information and encouraging you and uplifting you in the process to take a part of the democracy and not allowing anything to hinder you. That would be a way to assure that more people are counted in this election, because we know the faithful individuals that are in our churches or that are in our communities that are active, but we need to go out and go after our lost sheep. You can do this primarily by going to your circuit clerk's office and being able to see how many people have participated in the in-person voting in Panola County and get those numbers. And you'll know how many voters that have voted as of October 16th. Okay. You could get that information. And then after you get that information, post that information on your social media pages or within your church's platform and say, we've had X amount of people to vote in Bolivar County thus far, but we have a total amount of 20,000 voters in Bolivar County. We have a ways to go. And continue to allow those updates. We know then that we are seeing trends throughout the state of Mississippi where we have the numbers to do more and to see things done. In the previous election for the state, for the U.S. Senate seat, we saw smaller margins of voters and individuals that increased voter participation within their particular counties. So the numbers and the data are present for individuals. So I'm saying, leaders, get the numbers from your circuit clerk's office so that you can see how many people are actually being engaged in this process, how many people actually voted in your particular counties that are registered, that are not registered, and being able to work the numbers, because we need to assure participation, not not just November 3rd, but after November 3rd also, because we're wanting to continue the cycle, especially in the great state of Mississippi and the state of Tennessee, to increase voter participation. And it can't stop now, and it shouldn't stop now. We have ways to go, and being able to build that type of momentum from this election to the next is really important. So pastors and leaders and members, let's not only look to this election only, but let's continue this process throughout every election and get the numbers and the data so that we can ensure that everyone is participating.
Thank you. Dr. Frazier?
Yes, I heard, I can't remember actually who it was. In his definition for leadership, basically, the definition of leadership is influence. One of the things that we as leaders have is the ability to motivate and to inspire. We've been talking about how other pastors and leaders have just come out right and just say who they want you to vote for. They've not been shy about that. They've been on a mission, and even if they don't tell you who to vote for, they'll say, we won't tell you who to vote for, but these are the things you should look for. And of course, they're still doing it kind of, in an insidious way. So I think that we, by the same token, should use our influence. It's not that we tell people what to do and they go do it, but we do have a platform. We do have people that have said, okay, I want to be a part of your fellowship. I want to be a part of your ministry. This is not a job. People have elected. So at least to some degree, there's something that you say that they will hear. There's something that you share that they have an ear for. And so I do think as pastors and leaders, we cannot be shy about talking to our members and our constituents and those who follow us, whether it's on social media or physically in church. We cannot be shy about this. This is not the time for leaders to be shy. We must be very active. And so I don't tell people who to vote for specific reasons. But as I said, if they ask, I will tell them. But we cannot be shy. We must get out the vote. The good thing is that there is a lot of enthusiasm. There's been record-breaking early voting in a lot of states, because a lot of states that didn't before have early voting. So that's a good thing. But we cannot. There's a scripture that says, throughout the New Testament, actually, that we should watch and pray. So that there's two parts of this, and not to kind of over spiritualize this, but that we can discern the times, that it's not just about kind of going through the motions. Because, Jesus said to those around him, you can look in the sky and tell what kind of weather it is, but you can't even discern the times. So it is important for leaders to do that to the degree that people who are following you as you are a follower of Christ, but they're following you because they believe that you are providing some insight. So I do want to say that as leaders, it is critical for us to use our influence, our inspiration, our motivation to encourage those who will hear that this is not the time. This is not the time for sitting aside. This is not the time for giving up. This is not, we do, as I've said it before, and I'll say it again. God is in control. And he has given us certain privileges, powers, abilities, and we should move forward and not just set aside and give those up. So I just think that for leaders, we as leaders should be active in using our voice and platforms.
Attorney,
Dr.
yes.
Howze, I just wanted to throw one thing in there on this topic. Churches, if you have those vans, use those vans on election day, like you running them on Sunday morning to pick up people for Sunday school. Use your vans on election. That's another way, an easy way you can get involved. Run your route.
There's a question in the chat box that says, or statement, there are laws that are on the ballots as well. Please share with the people about those and the meaning of those the meaning of those laws. In Mississippi, there are different things that's on the ballot.
Oh, so we have the initiatives. I'm
Yes.
assuming that's what you're referring to. Okay. Right now we have an initiative for medical marijuana, and there's a lot of controversy in Mississippi regarding allowing or permitting the use of medical marijuana. And so with Initiative 65, the way initiatives actually are eligible to be placed on the ballot, individuals have to get enough signatures. And that's usually done when the Mississippi State Legislature fail to actually enact a law on the behalf of Mississippians.
Okay.
So when the legislature is not able to either get laws passed, individuals have the right to place initiatives on the ballot by accumulating signatures for a need to bring it to a vote for the people. And so what we're seeing now is the medical marijuana initiative, which is Initiative 65, got enough signatures to be placed on the ballot so the people could decide if medical marijuana should be used in a form to treat patients. So the way the initiatives are on the ballot, for medical marijuana, you have to actually vote twice. So as Attorney Hickman said, you have to be able to you should read the entire ballot, because as you're voting, if you vote for Initiative 65 and the use of medical marijuana, you have to vote in one section, yes, and then you have to also reiterate that yes and a follow-up question. So it's a two-part process. You have to actually vote twice in that section for the Initiative 65. So if you just vote one, then that vote is not even counted. And that was done also with Initiative 6042 when we were trying to get the MAEP funding for our schools.
Yes.
So there's some suppression there. Some people think, because a lot of times people don't read and they think, oh yeah, I voted for that. But if you don't vote twice, you missed an opportunity to vote in favor of it. For individuals that are not for medical marijuana, because I want to make this non-biased as possible, you then too would have to vote twice for the initiative not to pass in the particular section. The next initiative that's on the ballot in the state of Mississippi, in order for an individual to win a statewide election, if they got into a runoff, let's say within the Senate seat that we all are watching here in Mississippi and in other states, if those two individuals were placed into a runoff because no one received the majority, then according to a law that's still on the books here in Mississippi, the individual that would win would have to get a majority vote in Madison and Rankin counties. Well, we know the demographics of those particular counties and how that might be very challenging for some of us.
Yeah.
And so we wanted that law to be changed. The legislature was not able to get it done. So enough signatures, again, was acquired to bring it before the people, to allow the people to be able to vote to change that. Because it shouldn't be if you get a majority votes in Hinds or Rankin County, and in Madison or Rankin, that you're actually the chosen candidate. So we're wanting that law to be repealed. So you get an opportunity to vote for that particular initiative. And then lastly, Attorney Hickman spoke about our state flag. The state legislature commend all of my colleagues for voting for a change of our state flag, and we were able to do that. But now on the ballot is the choice of the design of the flag, and that design has to receive so many votes to actually become our new flag, or else we won't have a flag for the state of Mississippi. So there are three important parts on the ballot. As Attorney Hickman said, please don't stop with just the presidential candidates. Let's go from top to bottom with our ballots, please.
Oh, thank you. That is so wonderful.
And just to add there, on the most complicated one, I think, as Representative Jackson has alluded to, is definitely the medical marijuana one. And there, the reason you're having to vote twice is again, the same way they did with the education initiative, they've kind of split it into two different initiatives. You have 65 and then you have 65A. So in your vote, you need to vote to approve either 65A or 65 or 65A, or vote to approve neither 65A or 65. And then you come down and reaffirm which one you're approving if you approve one of the two. And so it's very important that you read the entire thing. I think one of them allows for medical marijuana use only by licensed physician if they're given to you prescribing. But then the second allows for individuals who have debilitating illnesses to use medical marijuana, but it's all medical marijuana. I just want to throw this out there. I'm neither going to advocate for or against it in this platform, but I will say one of the things somebody asked me when we were talking about this in another setting, that was like, oh, well, if we use it medical marijuana, then people will just be overusing and doing that. But the thing of the matter is, you have things like oxycodone, you have other drugs who are harder that are overused and they're already legal and prescribed. So I just think we need to think about it from that standpoint of they're using it as a drug for what it is, a drug, and not for recreational use. That the approval is not for recreational use, it's for a drug use.
Wow, this has been such an informative conversation today. And I thank each of you for joining in. So before we go, I want you to give each one of you guys to give some parting thoughts of how we can make sure that our voice be heard and that we can overcome as a church or as a Bible believer or as an individual to ensure that my vote is counted on November the 3rd. I want to keep on reiterating that. I want my voice to be heard on November the 3rd. Each one of you all, some parting statements or some parting thoughts that you would tell us.
Well, one of the things that I will say is, again, kind of going back to the piece I wrote in the blog, and that is that silence is consent. I think that one of the weapons that's being used against people, those of us who are socially conservative with the ways in which we view certain things, such as marijuana, use for medical purposes. Sometimes those issues are used against us because they're considered more Republican conservative issues, when at the very same time, those things that are very important to us as well are absolutely ignored in terms of our own equality. And so that kind of puts us in a precarious place. And again, our choice in this country, it's along the lines of these two major parties. I just want to encourage everyone not to get kind of stuck in that, because if you do, you'll just kind of say, well, I don't know what to do and I'll not participate. And I just want to encourage you to participate, that there are things that are important to you, to your quality of life, to the quality of life of your children, your grandchildren, your family, your communities, and beyond. And to don't let that voice be taken away, because if you do, then you're surrendering it to what you're not happy about, to what you can't live with. So I would just encourage you to take kind of ownership. There's some things that they're not going to be perfect about elections. I think it was George Bush the father Bush, that said politics is a dirty game. And that's all he said, and that's all he needed to say. There's just some things about it that we're not going to be happy with. Those things we can't control. Don't let that stop you from participating. And I'll just say lastly that I've traveled a lot of places in the world, and as much as I fight about how we don't live up to our ideal in this country of who we say we are as a nation, there's really no other place in the world that I would rather live. God has given us a beautiful opportunity here. And even though it's not perfect, that's what we strive for, to become that more perfect union. So whatever you do, don't sit out, participate. Silence is consent. Make your voice heard this year.
Thank you. Representative Jackson?
I think it's important that we all look at this as an opportunity to lead with our perspective things and influences that we have. And a lot of times as individuals, we could talk about what we don't have, but it's just like we've seen in our Bible stories where God has asked the people, well, what do you have? And right now, here's an opportunity for us to use exactly what we have, the right, the privilege to vote. And if it wasn't so precious, there wouldn't be as many forces coming against us to try to prevent us from being able to exercise the authority. And as a body of believers, we know that when we are given authority, it gives us ownership to be able to use that's necessary that we have in places and positions that we can be able to move some things. We've seen so many great leaders in Tennessee, Mississippi, and in our surrounding areas. But as a young elected official, it's now our time. It's now our time to show the nation, to show our children, to show our communities that we will be heard and we won't be silenced. It's now our time to take our mantles and take our rightful places to be counted and to vote in this election, because we have the right and we have the authority to do it. And we don't want to loosely not use the rights and privileges that we have. Because as Dr. Frazier and so many of us have said on this panel, and other nations and areas, individuals don't have a right to the democracy. So the things that we hold dear in this great nation and in our prospective states and counties and areas, you don't want the opportunity or the narrative to be that you didn't use what you had.
Yeah.
And so when we're counted and we all are using what we have that's dearly been fought for or that has been given to us now as a privilege, we need to make sure that we use exactly what we have. And when we do that, we can only be accountable for our actions. I don't want November 4th to happen and we shoulda, we coulda, yes, but we didn't. And I don't know why. No excuses. I know we're sick and tired of being sick and tired of issues and things that are happening in our communities and in our areas. So if this does not prompt you to vote, if seeing the things that are happening through our areas and communities don't compel us to vote, I really don't know what will.
Yeah.
But again, don't allow the narratives. Do not allow the narratives or the naysayers or the they sayers cause you to get in the fight of party politics. Align your vote with the individuals with the best interest in heart for all people. Not some, but all people. And then after you've done all you can, just stand. And let God be God. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. All right, attorney.
I think they pretty much summed it up. I mean, I think the idea is that we live in a democracy, and I can live with the democracy that we've created as long as everyone's voice is heard. So it doesn't matter who you vote for. That's why you go into a ballot and you vote alone. Doesn't matter who you vote for, as long as your voice is heard and who you vote for aligns with what your ideologies or your moral values or whatever leads you or drives you to do that is recognized. I just want to make sure that all of us recognize our power to vote and contribute to the democracy that we live in. And at that point, I can live with whatever the results are. So vote early, vote in every election, and vote in every race in every election. And I'll be satisfied. Thank you.
Thank you all so very much for being here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You all have been great. And I just would say, well, I'm going to tell y'all, I'm with her. I'm with her. And I want to thank all of our viewers for coming on, and thank you for all of the comments. And thank you all for sharing such great information. Our information, they say, thank you for the information on voting and encouraging everybody to vote. Somebody says you have cleared up a lot of confusing information that we had concerning the initiative. They say thank you, thank you, thank you. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate our listeners for taking time, and we will be sharing this on our Facebook page. It will be made available, and you can share it on the social media. Somebody says, please share this on so our other church members can see this. We will be sharing this so it can go public, so we can tell everybody, and I'll say it again, get out to vote. And if you don't vote, Dr. Beverly, your phrase is what?
Silence is consent.
Silence is consent. If you don't vote, then you think I go along with everything that is happening.
Yeah.
Let your voice be heard. Thank you.
Yeah. Blessings, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye. You guys were good. Thank y'all.